We met for the first time in 2004, in June 2004, and it was in the headquarters of the film company that we work with in Pyongyang.
This is my friend, James Joseph Droznak, and I've known him for 39 years.
They were quite enthused to be meeting us and telling us their story, and they'd not really spoken English for that long a time to native speakers.
I'm happy where I am retired.
And also I think a little bit wary because they weren't sure whether they could trust us, who they could trust in the room, that kind of thing. He was quite frail. I felt he was really trying to impress us, would tell us various sort of stories that would try and impress us but actually had the opposite effect. Maybe his bravado was to make sure that the North Koreans reported back that he'd said this, this and this. So I didn't take it literally that, you know, he was telling lies. So it's a very, you have to, you know, put certain parameters in terms of judgment when you're talking to someone in North Korea when other people are listening. The thing that I really recall is that he was desperately missing his wife. There was no question about that. I guess he knew fairly early on, they'd confided in each other, they knew fairly early on what had happened, you know, what had happened to her. I think they'd always kept that from the children, and so the children maybe would have needed to be told, and I don't think he was coping particularly well in terms of being a single father, and suddenly the mother's just gone. I got the impression that Jenkins had been drinking quite hard for quite a long time. I think there was an element of saving his own skin, for sure. He defected from America in 1965 at the height of the Cold War while the Vietnam War was going on. It's a fairly serious crime to voluntarily go off to your own enemy. And he made up, you know, I mean, his official explanation was that he heard that the unit was going to Vietnam, and he was so scared he just did anything, and he was really intending to go to Russia, hand himself in to the Soviet embassy, hand himself in and go back to America. And the court judge at the time just said, have you ever looked at a map? And it really sort of beggars belief that was a plausible, remotely plausible excuse. There was clearly something else that made him go across. What that is, we'll never know. But there was no way he was crossing the most heavily fortified border on earth in January, across minefields where they didn't even know where the mines were anymore because they'd lost the maps. There's no way he was doing that to go to a Russian embassy 200 kilometres north. But I think he desperately wanted to be with Soga, and I think he desperately wanted to keep his family together. There are some people in America that will never forgive him for desertion, but I think the sympathy in Japan was huge, and you know, that played a part in the diplomatic relations that followed. I wanted to just find out this incredible story of, you know, what makes a man at the height of the Cold War defect to the mortal enemy. You know, the tension between North Korea and the South, whether that's America or South Korea, has been there since 1948. And, you know, there are times where we all think World War III is going to happen, and this is one of those times. And even at the time that we're filming, that was quite high on the agenda as well. People would understand, you know, from our perspective, from the Western perspective, we understand North coming to us, but we can't understand why you know, the Americans would go north. So I was fascinated by that. So the North Koreans, in what was then the Culture Ministry, decided that they could trust us with something that was, we call it in England, a political hot potato, that no one really wants to touch because it's too hot. So we found that there was, we actually found that the pressure from the North Koreans was the least. There was also Japan, there was South Korea, there was American government, American military, a little bit of British government as well, that really wanted to sort of make sure that we were telling their side of the story. So yeah, we had an awful lot of pressure to deal with, not just from the North Koreans. Within North Korea at the time, and I think it's still the same, but in North Korea at the time, there's always a battle between the hawks and the doves, and the people that want to sort of open up and explore more of the outside world, and the people that fear that and think that there will be a war if we only, you know, if we let them in, you know, the war will happen. So there was that we had to work with and against within North Korea, And the US Army and the US military, they're very embarrassed obviously about that story, but they also wanted to find out why that would happen, also knowing that they had no military intelligence in North Korea, so what we were putting out in our films the first time, they'd seen that kind of thing. And what really struck me was how ignorant everyone was about everyone else. So it wasn't just that we were ignorant about North Korea or they were ignorant about us, but Japan was ignorant about North Korea was ignorant about Japan. Japan's actually was ignorant, or America was ignorant to Japan's wishes in terms of Soga and bringing Jenkins back and not giving him the full punishment. So it was a very multi-layered layer of problems.